free. Don't forget you are welcome home, welcome home.
First, before we exit out of this subject, I wanted to make an intervention on top of this. Many of my people don't know this, but in African tradition, those of you who are indigenous, you may know, in African tradition, when there is a death in the village, when there is a catastrophe of death in the village, it is required that the deceased gets the rites, funerary rites of passage, and should be endowed with all the necessary elements so that they can make their voyage back to their deity, so they can reincarnate to come back to this earth. Now, there's a downside of that. When the deceased and a catastrophe happens, and you ignore and you do not give them the funerary rites, African ancestors say that the spirit of those deceased will hover over that village, they will hover over that nation, they will hover over that continent, and they will bring havoc, and chaos to that house, to that nation, to that continent, until you give them their funerary rites of passage. Now, do you know the transatlantic slave trade, according to the figures by the United Nations UNICEF, at a summary conference in Haiti in 1974, they guesstimated apologetically that 210 million Africans were murdered during the 400-year transatlantic slave trade. Be the case, 210 million. And we know during the 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade that our mother Ghana, which was called the Gold Coast, had a certain number of slave ports of the totality of slave ports all the way from Senegal down to Angola, that was designated by Europeans as the official slave coast. Senegal down to Angola, that's a humongous distance. And there were 66 slave ports. Ghana, the Gold Coast, had 46 of the 66. So you do your mathematics. If 210 million by the statistics of UNESCO were murdered during the 400 years, and we know it was more than 210 million in Paris. Sir Walter Rodney said it was over 360 million. You know how Europe underdeveloped Africa, he pointed that out. But Ghana had almost 80% of the slave ports. She had 46 of the 66. And today we have 26 remaining and standing, all the way from Keta on the Togolese border, all the way to Axim in the western region, including Christianborg, which was the seat of power of the government here up until about 20 years ago. Now let me come back to my point. My point is this. You know and I know that there has never been a recognition officially of giving funerary rites to the dead or those who were slaughtered in the hundreds of millions over the 400 years. No one has ever acknowledged and given the funerary rites. Now I come back to my point in African tradition. This has been going on since the days before Kemet, that if you do not give the funerary rites to those who were slaughtered, catastrophe that happened in the village, the spirit of the deceased, it will rise over the village, and it will not leave that village. It will just settle, and it will bring havoc to that village. Isn't Africa been having havoc and chaos? Yes. And I'm telling you, are coming home. is the essence of correcting that. Let me stop a minute and acknowledge my dear brother here, Nana, Dr. Obadele and family. You just arrived. I'm so happy to see you here, my brother. We want to incorporate you in on the high table so that we can hear from you. But I want to be very clear about this one point. Because I believe, not that I believe, I know that there is a link between the chaos going on in the African continent and why we cannot get our act together is because we have rejected our sons and daughters that spent 400 years in captivity. And we have rejected by not acknowledging and giving the funerary rites to the deceased and the hundreds of millions who were slaughtered. Their souls, their spirits are still hovering over this continent. And I believe that the only one who can reconcile this are the children of the diaspora who are coming home. The descendants of the transatlantic slave trade are the only ones that I feel that can bring about the reconciliation of that. And this is why I say, Africa, wake up! Africa, wake up! Your children are crying to come home, and you cannot keep them out. You must give them the right to return. If you don't give them the right to return, I guarantee you, Africa is doomed. Africa will be doomed if she doesn't give the African diaspora the right to return.